Hello everyone. This week we will cover the basic concepts of demand and supply. We will introduce them. So remember last week we talked about alternative rationing mechanisms, right? So I asked you this question. Imagine I have a ticket to a concert of a popular band, right? And I bring this ticket to 101 classroom, assuming we are doing this class in person, and I ask, who would like to get this ticket? I would like to give this ticket to one of you who wants to go to the concert, right? Now, in this example, we talked about alternative rationing mechanisms. How do we decide who gets the ticket, right? So I might just look at the class, just pick someone who seems likable to me. Or we can have a lottery. We can determine who gets the ticket randomly. Or we can determine by having an exam. So these are all different rationing mechanisms. And lastly, we talk about price as a rationing mechanism, right? So I might ask, is there anyone who is willing to pay for this ticket? And how much are you willing to pay? So we can hold an auction, and then you might start like, I would like to pay 10 TL, and someone else might say, I will pay 20 TL. And whoever is willing and able to pay the highest price would get the ticket. So when we allow price mechanism to allocate a scarce good, then we call it market forces. Demand and supply actually show us how market forces, how people who are willing to obtain something and people who are willing to supply or sell something interact in a way that would result in an outcome where a good is rationed out. So in this example, so we will just talk about the definitions of demand and supply. Mostly we will talk about definitions in this week, and then we will have some examples. But let's just focus on this example. When I ask in the classroom, who wants to get this ticket? Like, offer me some prizes, right? We are making an auction. And there would be various people. Some would say, I can only pay 20 TL. Some would offer a higher price, 30, 50, 200, maybe 500, right? Eventually, the person who offers the highest price, 500, gets the ticket. So what determines this person's demand for this ticket? Okay, that is the question we are asking. So when we say demand, we have something in mind. Why is this person specifically, Ali or Ayşe, who is able to purchase the ticket? So think about this question for a moment. Why is it this person but not the other one? You might come up several answers, right? You might say, this person loves the band more than other people. He really loves the band, so he is willing to pay a really high price, right? That's one explanation. Okay, but there might be two people who really very much like the band, but one of them might be able to offer a higher price because he or she has a higher income. Right? Then income might be something explaining this person's demand for this ticket. So let's systematically look at this from this example. When we say demand, we refer to the willingness and ability of someone to purchase a good or service. Now, the question we asked for this ticket example, let's ask it for another good. Let's talk about our demand for coffee. Now, when we talk about something specific about demand, usually we think about a certain period of time. How much coffee am I willing to purchase during a day? Okay? How much coffee are you willing to purchase during a day? And for simplicity, let's assume we are talking about a standard type of coffee. Okay, so we don't talk about different qualities of coffee. Let's just focus on there's one type of coffee in the cafeteria. Okay, and then how much coffee, how many cups of coffee am I willing to purchase? Okay, what determines this? Now, number one, when I decide to purchase coffee, I'm probably looking at the price, right? Unless I'm super rich. So the price of coffee would be something that I would be concerned about when I decide to how many cups of coffee I would like to purchase. Then my ability to purchase coffee, given its price, would depend on my income, right? If I don't have any earnings, right? If I have a really limited amount of income, for which I can only spend on the necessities, I might not purchase coffee. Now, what else apart from income? Let's say I have no income. So we haven't defined income in this class yet. But when we talk about income, we refer to a flow variable. When we work in return for a salary or a wage, which we receive on a monthly basis or on a yearly basis, right? So when we say flow variable, we are talking about a variable which we define for a certain period of time. So if I ask you what is your income, usually I ask it by referring to a specific period of time. What is your monthly income, right? Okay, so income is something we receive on a periodical basis, right? So sometimes people don't have income. Assume I do not work, or you might not be working, but you might still spend money, right? How is it possible? You might still purchase stuff. You or your family might have accumulated their previous savings, right? In a way that creates a stock of assets which you can spend, a stock of money which you can spend. This we call wealth, right? So for instance, I might not have any income right now. Assume I'm an actress, but I earned a lot in the past and I have a lot of money in the bank, right? So I wouldn't care about how expensive coffee is. I can still demand a lot of coffee even though I don't have income, right? So, okay, price. I look at the price of coffee. Income, how much I earn. Wealth, how much I have. Okay, these all would be important in my decisions about purchasing coffee. You might think coffee is a very small good. I mean, this is just an example, but you can think about other things. My demand for luxury cars, my demand for books, right? So, okay, all these things are important. What else would affect our demand? Tastes and preferences. Maybe this is the first thing you would think about, right? Normally, how much do I like coffee? That would be important in my decision. Usually, in this course, in microeconomics and in most economics courses, we take tastes or preferences as given, right? Everybody has different tastes. We do not really ask where they come from. So we would be taking them as given and they are subjective. Now, what else? Okay, price of substitutes. So, what is a substitute? A good which consumers consider as a close alternative to another good, right? So for me, I'm trying to wake up in the morning, I need a hot drink, and tea and coffee might be similar goods, right? If consumers consider two goods as similar in use, then they would be called substitutes. Price of substitutes is important. Why? So assume every day I drink a few cups of coffee and a few cups of tea. And suddenly, for some reason, tea is much cheaper, okay? There are more companies selling tea, and I can purchase tea at a much lower price, okay? So if this is the case, I'm considering coffee and tea as substitutes, I might say, instead of drinking 1 cup of coffee, I might maybe drink 2 cups of tea. So I might reduce my demand for coffee because tea is cheaper. Let's think about another example. Think about red meat, right, and chicken. Okay, 2 things that usually people consider similar because they are both sources of protein in diet, right? And they might be used in similar ways in cooking. So let's say for various reasons, price of meat is now higher. Then my demand for chicken would probably go up because I consider them similar. Now, what else? Price of complements. So complements are goods that we consider to be good together in use, right? So if there is a good which I usually consume with another good, then these 2 goods would be considered as complements. They would be complementary in my consumption. So again, whether 2 goods are complements or not, it might depend on personal taste, right? So let's say I'm very obsessed with consuming coffee with chocolate, right? I have this habit, whenever I purchase coffee, I purchase a small piece of chocolate. Now, assuming chocolate got really expensive, okay, then I might say, I don't want to drink coffee because I have to pay a lot for chocolate, which is a complementary good. So if price of a complement increases, my demand for coffee might go down. Now, this is a personal example, but we can give more general examples about complementary goods. So think about 2 things which are complementary for everyone. Automobiles, okay? I'm driving, I choose to drive, so I purchase a car. And then in order to drive a car, I would need gasoline, right? Because cars work with gasoline. So gasoline and cars, these are 2 things that go together. They are complementary. When price of gasoline goes up a lot, I might consider giving up my consumption of cars or my demand for cars. I might say, I would use public transportation. And even though I was considering purchasing a car, I might give up that idea, right? So that's how price of complements work in determining our demand. What else? Expected prices. Okay, what do we mean by expected prices? So, okay, when I'm thinking about how much coffee coffee would be a difficult example to give. So let's try something else. I'm thinking about purchasing a e-book reader, okay? So because I enjoy it and you don't consume paper and so on. So when I'm thinking about this, I would consider the current price of e-books. How expensive is it? Can I afford it? I would consider my income and so on. And then I would also think about this. What would happen to the price of e-book readers in a month in the future? Okay? So assuming that I have this knowledge that e-book prices would go down in a couple of months. There are new companies, new technologies, so they would be cheaper in 2 months. I might consider delaying my demand for e-books today so that I can purchase in the future. Okay? That is one example of how expected prices affect our demand. Let me give you another example. Let's assume I'm smoking and I'm purchasing cigarettes, right? So I have this information that the price of cigarettes would go up substantially in 2 weeks because I heard about new taxes would be introduced, right? So cigarettes would be much more expensive in 2 weeks. And cigarettes are durable goods, which means I can stock them. Like they don't spoil like tomatoes, right? I can keep a lot of cigarettes somewhere around in the cupboard. So if I think prices would go up in the future, I might just decide to purchase much more today than I would in another case, right? So if expected price of a good gets higher, if expected price of a good gets higher, I would demand it more today. So that is the relationship between expected prices and demand. Okay, wait, there should be one more thing. Yes, expected income. How does expected income affect my demand for any good? So let's think about what? Okay, I'm thinking about purchasing an e-book reader. And but like I have a limited budget. When I purchase an e-book reader this month, I need to give up my demand for other things, right? The trade-off, the opportunity cost. But let's say I know that I will get a salary raise next month, meaning I would have a higher income next month. So, okay, I consider my income today when I'm making a decision. But also, if I have some information about future income, that would affect my current demand. So if I believe I will have a higher income next month, how will it affect my demand today? I might just use my credit card, right? Knowing that I will have a higher income next month, I might spend in a more relaxed way this month. So if expected income is higher, my demand for goods would be higher. So, okay, these are all the relevant determinants of demand, but I would like to introduce one more idea here. Usually, okay, we have covered all these different determinants, but when we talk about income, so okay, let me give you an example. I have very good friends or family in another city, right? And I would like to visit them every few months. And I might take a bus to visit them, to go to this other city, and it takes, let's say, 7-8 hours. Or I might use flights. I might buy an airplane ticket to visit them. Now, if I have a higher income right now, if I get a raise, okay, it would be more likely for me to demand more flights, right? Because it's more comfortable. It is a normal good that I would like to demand, that I would like to consume. So for most goods, okay, you can think, for instance, books. If I have a higher income, I like books, and I would purchase more books. I would demand more books. If I have a higher income, I like coffee, I would demand more coffee. So usually, for most goods, when income increases, demand for that good also increases. We call these goods normal goods, right? But there are also some types of goods which we do not like very much, but we still consume because their alternative is too expensive for our budget, for our income, right? So for those type of goods, when income goes up, when our income is higher, we might demand them less. These goods are named inferior goods. So when we look at how income affects demand, we can talk about two types of goods. Normal goods, okay? Like books, coffee, the goods whose demand would increase when my income increases, right? And then the other type of goods, we call them inferior goods, okay? So there would be some goods that you would consume less when you have a higher income, okay? For instance, if I have a higher income, I might like to get my own car and use public transportation less. So if this is the case for me, then public transportation is an inferior good for me. Or when I was in high school, there was this thing called potato in a bun, ekmek arası patates, right? So this thing is kind of something that you would purchase because you don't have a lot of money. When you have a higher income, you would like to eat better things. So this potato bun is an inferior good. When your income goes up, demand for this good would go down. So the relationship between income and demand might mostly it is positive, right? When we are talking about normal goods, but it can also be negative if we are talking about inferior goods. Okay, these are all determinants of demand, the things that affect our willingness and ability to purchase a good or service. Out of these all determinants, Price is the most important one in our framework because, as we will see, price would work as a rationing mechanism. So we would like to specifically focus on this relationship. So we express it in a different way on graphs as well. So we would like to talk about this relationship between price and demand. This relationship is expressed as the law of demand. Okay? Why do we call it a law of demand? Because we think this negative relationship between quantity demanded of a good and the price of a good holds almost all the time. In real life, we look at examples, right? We look at lots of examples and we see keeping other things constant, when everything is constant, when the price of a good increases, the quantity demanded of that good decreases. So we observe this relationship all the time. It is very difficult to find exceptions. And also this is commonsensical. So this is such a general principle that we all accept. We call it a law. So the law of demand states that the quantity of a good demanded is inversely, negatively related to the good's price. Okay? Now, if we express it in a more detailed way, in a more complete way, this law of demand, look at the second definition. Conditional on all else being equal, okay? When price of a good increases, quantity demanded of that good decrease. Conversely, as the price of a good decreases, quantity demanded will increase. Now, in this longer definition of the law of demand, I would like to point to this first phrase, all else being equal. What does this mean? This is important for understanding how the law of demand functions. All else being equal means all the things other than price, which might affect our demand, remains constant for us, for this principle to be valid. So let me repeat this. When we are talking about the law of demand, when we are talking about this inverse relationship, we should be assuming all the other things that shape our demand remains the same, constant. Okay? Why is this important? I will try to explain it with an example, but this phrase, all else being equal, there is a Latin phrase we like to use a lot in economics textbooks. So you should also know it. I will write it here. Ceteris paribus. Now this is a fancy phrase which basically means all else being equal, ceteris paribus. Okay? So if you hear this phrase, that means we are keeping everything other than the two variables we are talking about as constant. So let me give an example about the importance of this. So I look at the price of ebooks. Okay? They are going up. Or let's take something simpler. Price of avocados. Right. Okay. That would be a better example. Let's say price of avocados are going up. I'm observing this. And then I go collect data about how many avocados people purchase every month in Turkey, okay? And then I see quantity demanded of avocados is also going up, okay? So price of avocados is going up. This is an observation. I collect data. And quantity demanded of avocados is also going up. People are purchasing more avocados, okay? So when I make this observation, I say, hey, this doesn't work. The law of demand doesn't hold. You are wrong. Now, can I say this when I make this observation? Price of avocados are going up and quantity demanded is going up. What is going on? Can I say the law of demand doesn't hold? No, I cannot. Because in real life, which we operate in, there might be other things that are affecting the demand for avocados. Okay? For instance, there are advertisements or news about how healthy consuming avocados are, right? So when price of avocados are going up, at the same time, there's something else going on. People just like avocados much more than before. Or it is possible that at the same time, people have more income, okay? They are able to purchase avocados more even though their price is higher because they have more income. So remember the previous slide, we have this list of determinants of demand. If any one of these things in the list changes parallel to a price change, then this relationship would not hold. But it doesn't mean the law of demand is not valid. Because what the law of demand says is that ceteris paribus, when we keep all other things constant, when price of a good increases, quantity demanded decreases, and when price of a good decreases, quantity demanded increases. So if we know income, taste, and other things are constant, then when price of avocados go up, quantity demanded would go down. Then we will see the law of demand would hold. Okay? Now this is something very, very important. Okay, now why? This might be the most difficult. Actually, when you first think about this is so obvious. We call it the law because everybody agrees on this, right? You don't have to take economics to say when price of a good increases, quantity demanded goes down. This is such a simple idea. So when we ask why, you might ask back, why are you asking this? This is so obvious. But in this course, we will have some answers that are different than how we express it in the daily language. So we would like to focus on them. So why, when price of a good increases, quantity demanded decreases? Okay. There are actually three answers to this question, and in future weeks, we will explain them more in detail, but I would like to shortly talk about them. The first reason, most goods have substitutes, okay? Most goods have substitutes. So, like if we are consuming a particular type of fruit, if its price is going up, I might just switch to another type of fruit. They don't have to be perfect substitutes, right? So think about oranges and apples. Okay, I might be liking oranges more. Okay, they give maybe different vitamins, they provide different nutritional value, but still they are both fruits, and for most people they are substitutes. Or think about chicken and red meat. They are substitutes, right? So when price of a good increases, price of red meat going up, that good, ceteris paribus, becomes relatively more expensive. Okay? When price of red meat increases, red meat becomes more expensive vis-a-vis its substitutes, chicken. Okay? So because it becomes more expensive, I would substitute away from red meat to chicken, which means the quantity demanded of red meat, the quantity that I demand, would go down. Okay? Now don't forget, we are always saying ceteris paribus here, because if the price of red meat and price of chicken increases at the same time, this might not hold. But we are assuming everything else is constant, so when price of red meat goes up, it becomes relatively more expensive, and we substitute away from red meat. This is the first reason. This is called, okay, let's write it here. This is the answer to the why question, right? This is called substitution effect. Okay, substitution effect of a price increase or substitution effect of a price decrease. Now, there is another reason why when price of a good increases, I would demand less of that good. Forget about substitutes. Let's think about books. Now, books are more expensive. Their price went up. Let's say I had a budget in my mind for purchasing books or similar things, okay? CDs. Every month I spend a certain part of my income. I make a budget and I spend a certain part of my income for purchasing these type of things that would give me pleasure or knowledge, whatever. When price of books increase, the purchasing power of my income, I have the same income, because remember we say ceteris paribus. So my income is the same. I still have, let's say, 5,000 TL a month, and I'm still thinking about spending 200 TL every month for books. When the price of books are higher, with that same 200, that part of income, which didn't change, I could purchase fewer books. So when price of a good increases, purchasing power of my income goes down. Because my purchasing power of income goes down, I would purchase fewer of those goods. This is called income effect. Income effect of a price increase. Now, here is the interesting thing. Income effect of a price increase works in different ways for normal goods and inferior goods. Okay? So, let's go back to the example I have given. Every few months, I want to visit my friends or family in another city. And sometimes, like, I take flights and sometimes I use bus. I wanna like maximize my comfort, but also I have a limited amount of income. Now assume price of flights would, price of airplane tickets, right? It went up, it goes up. Now, when it goes up, with the same budget I dedicate for traveling, I could purchase fewer flights. And flights are normal goods. If I have higher income, I would demand them more. If I have lower income, I would demand them less. So through income effect, because it's a normal good, when price of a flight goes up, quantity demanded of that good would go down. So income effect and substitution effect for a normal good works in the same direction. When price of a good increases, both the income effect and substitution effect would result in lower quantity demanded. Okay? Good. Now, think about an inferior good, such as bus vacations, okay? So the bus tickets. I might go to another city by purchasing a bus ticket instead of going on a flight. Now, if the buses are more expensive, okay, price of a bus ticket goes up. Ceteris paribus, keeping everything else constant, substitution effect would mean buses are more expensive relative to flights, okay, their relative price went up, so we would demand fewer bus tickets, right? Okay, substitution effect works in the same direction. When price of a good increases, quantity demanded decreases. Now, income effect for bus tickets might work in the opposite direction. How? When the price of buses go up, the total amount of bus tickets and flights I could purchase with the same amount of budget, with the same amount of income that I plan to spend on traveling would be less, okay? Meaning, when price of buses go up, my real income, how much I could purchase with my income, would go down. Because buses are inferior, I might just like to preserve the total amount of travel, and I might say I would purchase fewer flights and more bus tickets so that I can still travel as much as before. Even though buses are more expensive now, the income effect would work in the opposite direction. Meaning, for inferior goods, income effect means when the price of a good increases, quantity demanded tends to increase as well. Okay? So substitution effect and income effect for an inferior good works in opposite directions. But usually substitution effect is higher than income effect. So overall, we will still observe the law of demand to hold. Meaning, when the price of a good increases, quantity demanded decreases, both for normal goods and inferior goods. For normal goods, both work in the same direction, but for inferior goods, the reason why the law of demand holds is that substitution effect would be higher than income effect. So we will still observe this negative relationship. Now, in theory, there might be an exception. Income effect might be bigger than substitution effect. Okay? And then this law of demand would not work. Then we would like, we are talking about this. Ceteris paribus, when price of a good increases, quantity demanded of that good increases. This sounds very weird, and in real life, it is very hard to find examples of this. But there is some debate for it. So we might discuss a little bit about this in the discussion part, but I will write the name for this type of good, which is very hard to find. For this type of good for which the law of demand does not hold. Given goods, okay? So given goods, okay, theoretically speaking, given goods are inferior goods for which income effect is higher than substitution effect, for which there is a positive relationship between price of a good and quantity demanded of a good. So these are the two reasons why we observe the law of demand. Now, we are about to finish, but how we show the law of demand on a graph, I would like to also talk about it. But I would like to also mention another third reason for the law of demand, which we will later discuss much more in detail. But I would like you to hear it so that we can connect the dots later. To explain it, I will give an example of a demand schedule. What is a demand schedule? A table which shows the relationship of price of a good and quantity demanded of a good. Okay? So I will write down an individual demand schedule. What is an individual demand schedule? A table that shows the relationship between quantity demanded and price for a person. Okay? So let's say I'm writing my demand schedule for coffee during a day. Okay? So let's write it here. Okay. Price of coffee, quantity demanded of coffee. Okay. Let me use another pen. So let's say when price of coffee is 0, okay, it's free, okay. The amount of coffee I demand might be actually infinite, right? But to make it easier, it might be infinite, but I don't want to drink coffee because after a certain number of cups, I would really feel bad, right? So there is a limit to how much I would like to consume, even when it is free. So when coffee is priced at 0 TL, I would demand 5 cups of coffee a day. When price of coffee is 1, okay, let's say, okay, it's cheap, but it's still, I'm paying a price, so I would demand 4 cups of coffee. Now let's say price of coffee is a little bit higher, it's 2. I would demand 3 cups of coffee. Let's say it's a little bit higher. Now you get the idea. I drink 4 cups of coffee. Sorry. Now I have to try to erase it. Okay. Now that was weird. 2 cups of coffee. And if price is higher, 4, I would demand even less. And let's say when price of coffee is 5 TL, it's too much, too high for me. I would rather drink tea or other things. right? And then my quantity demanded would be 0. Okay. So what does this table say? It is actually a table that depicts the law of demand. When other things are constant, when price of coffee is higher, quantity demanded of coffee is lower. I demand fewer amounts of coffee, right? So I give this very simple example, like if you have to write this as an equation, which I will not do now, but you should be able to write it as a very simple linear equation, right? An equation of price of coffee and quantity. So how would you express it as an equation? We will see many examples of this later, but I want you to try yourself. And then this equation, which we call a demand function, and in this course, these demand functions would always be linear and very simple, would have a negative slope. Why it would have a negative slope? Because of the law of demand. When price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. Okay, I said I would not write it, but this is just so simple. Let me write it. Quantity demanded is 5 minus P, okay? So the relationship between price of coffee and quantity demanded is negative. So if you put different numbers here, right? I gave these numbers in discrete amounts, but when I write it this way, it is a linear continuous function, and we prefer these functions because it is easier to work with them. But when you put different prices here, you will find different amounts of quantity demanded, and there is a negative relationship. Okay, this is a very simple demand function. So, okay, this is what this type of demand function is what we show on a demand and supply graph. Okay, so a demand function shows us the relationship between quantity demanded and price, ceteris paribus, given all other things as constant. So this is a demand function I depict, for instance, given my income is 5,000 TL, given I like coffee a lot and that taste doesn't change, given the prices of substitutes and complements do not change. So given all those things, this is the relationship between price of coffee and quantity demanded of coffee. Now, why there is a negative relationship between price of coffee and quantity demanded of coffee? When you think at an individual level, there is a reason, there is another reason which we can relate to those. Let's say, when I am drinking no coffee and I'm thinking about purchasing the first cup of coffee in the morning, you know, shall I purchase a cup of coffee in the morning or not? Now that is the sweetest cup of coffee because it is the first one, right? And for the first cup of coffee, I am willing to pay 4 TL, okay? This is how much I actually like the first cup of coffee. Now, basically when I look at the schedule from this direction, this is what it is telling me. If the price is 4 TL, I will drink one cup of coffee. But when I'm thinking about the second cup of coffee, it is in the morning. How much what is the highest price? Let me ask this way. What is the highest price am I willing to pay for the second cup of coffee? Okay. Now here, this point on my demand schedule is telling me that when I want to drink that second cup of coffee, I'm willing to pay 3 TL. Not 4 TL, but 3 TL. Now, when I'm thinking about purchasing the third cup of coffee, okay, this is a personal demand curve, individual demand curve, how much am I willing to pay? What is the highest price for the third cup of coffee I will consume? 2 TL. So basically, demand schedule is also showing me how much I'm willing to pay for each cup of coffee. And it is telling me as the numbers of coffee goes up, numbers of coffee I consume goes up, the price I'm willing to pay goes down. Okay? Why? This is a very basic human quality. As we consume more of a thing, the satisfaction we get from that additional consumption goes down. Let me repeat this. As we consume more of a good, the same good, the additional satisfaction we get from consuming that additional amount goes down. This is the law of diminishing marginal utility. Okay. If you cannot see it, I'm just repeating it, the law of diminishing marginal utility. We will talk about this later in the future weeks, but this is something you should keep in mind because it will be useful for us. So, last slide. Let's bring everything together and see how a demand curve looks. Okay? Now, I ask you, it's very simple, to draw this. Actually, to draw this, because these are discrete numbers, but if we express it as a linear, simple equation with a negative slope, you can draw this, right, on a graph. So this is how our usual demand curves look like. On the vertical axis, we have price of the good. On the horizontal axis, we have quantity of that good. So it is a downward sloping curve. Okay? Any demand curve for which the law of demand holds will be downward sloping, meaning the price of a good and quantity demanded of that good would be inversely related. When price goes up, quantity demanded would go down. So if we draw this, right, we would also draw an inversely related, a downward sloping demand curve. Now, this is an individual demand curve. So we know the answer to this question, right? Why is it downward sloping? Because of the law of demand. And throughout this curve, we are just keeping all other things constant. So we will talk a little bit more about what happens to this demand curve if we don't keep other things constant. Okay? If we drop ceteris paribus. What happens if things other than price changes to this curve? So we will talk about that, and we will talk about the relationship between individual demand curve and market demand curve, and then we will move on to supply. But this is where we will stop for now. Already we had a lot of material to think about. Okay.